We had just gotten back, and I was ready to take a nap, or at least rest after the crazy last few days. But now someone had pulled up in our driveway. I didn't even get to finish my meal. "Ali, could you try to find Trish and Mrs. Barnes?" I asked. I went out to the living room and looked out of the window. Sure enough, there was a white car in the driveway. "That doesn't look like one of the ones we saw," I said. The car door opened and a man got out slowly. He stood there for a moment, looking at the house, before walking towards the front porch. Mrs. Barnes opened up the door and had her gun pointed at the ground. "Stop right there," she said. The man stopped and held his hands out with his arms half raised. "It's okay," he said. "I'm just like you." He looked over at me and then back to Mrs. Barnes. "You are all in need of help, and I'm here to help you." I had envisioned help from the military, or at least the police, not from a singular slow-moving man who looked to be in his 60s. "What can you do to help us?" Mrs. Barnes asked. He took a few more steps towards us. "How many people do you have in that house?" he responded. "A lot," I chimed in, being very cautious of the question. "How many are with you?" He pointed back to the empty car. "It is just me." "I mean, how many are with you at your house or wherever you're staying?" I said. He smiled. "I told you. It's just me." He moved slowly and with a slight limp. As much as I tried not to let appearances sway me, I found it hard to believe he was able to survive on his own. "Is this your house?" the man asked, looking at me. "It doesn't appear to be anyone's anymore," I said. "We needed a new place to stay for a while until we decide what to do next." "Maybe you'll make better decisions this time," he said, as another smile crossed his face. I looked over at Mrs. Barnes, who had raised her rifle a little more. "What the hell do you mean by that?" she said. "Seems to me, if you're looking for a new place, you must have messed up at your old one," he said. "We did everything we could to get as many people out of there as possible. We lost a lot of good people," yelled Mrs. Barnes. "How many people have you helped?" His smile went away. "Oh, I've helped a lot of people," he said. "A lot of people. And like I said, I'm here to help you now too." He breathed into his hands to warm them up, and then rubbed them together. "Let's get out of the cold and go inside." I looked at Mrs. Barnes and shrugged my shoulders. The man walked up to the porch steps just as Trish was opening the door. "Thank you, miss," he said, and then walked past her into the house. Trish looked surprised. "Who is that?" she asked. "We need to find out," said Mrs. Barnes, as we quickly followed him inside. The man walked past the staring eyes of our group into the kitchen. He went through the cabinets and helped himself to a box of cereal. After grabbing a bowl and pouring himself a healthy portion, he sat down at the table and hastily began eating. "It would be so much better with milk," he said, in between his handfuls of Cheerios. Mrs. Barnes and I stood in the doorway, both not really sure how to react to this man. But then, Trish squeezed past us and confronted him. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" she said. "You can't just barge into our house and take our food without asking." The man didn't look up from his bowl, but stopped eating for a moment and clenched his hand into a fist on top of the table. "It won't be yours for much longer if you keep taking that tone with me," he said, and then took another big mouthful. I forgot how good Cheerios are." Mrs. Barnes walked over and forcefully took the bowl away from him. "Don't you threaten us," she said. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms in front of his chest. "I'm here to save you, and this is how you treat me? Maybe I should just let them come here and take this house." He pushed himself up from the table and then looked at his watch. Another smile creeped back onto his face. "Maybe I'll just be going now." I didn't like this guy, but he seemed to know something about the changed people and was clearly implying that we were in danger here. "Why don't we start over?" I said to him, and held out my hand. "I'm Joe." He glanced over at Trish and Mrs. Barnes, his smile disappearing. "I'll take my bowl back now," he said. He then looked back over at me and shook my hand. "My name's Rick." Mrs. Barnes reluctantly slid the bowl back over to him as he sat back down. We waited for him to speak again while he noisily crunched away at the cereal. It must have been a while since he had eaten anything. After he was finally done eating, he said, "You are underestimating how smart they are. They are much smarter than the average person. although that isn't saying much. He let out a small laugh and looked up at me. I bet you thought they were pretty stupid for not seeing you behind that house. They knew you were there, but were just waiting for you to lead them here. We made sure to lose them all before we came back here, I said. And where were you when we were hiding? He smiled again. I was doing what I always do, watching and learning. And if I was able to find you, then so can they. He looked at his watch again and then got up from his chair. I think I'll be going now. I thought you were going to help us, I said. He started walking towards the door to leave and said, I just did, but if you want more help and you make it out of here alive, come by the fire station north of here and bring more food. My supply is getting low. We watched him get back in his car and drive away. What is wrong with that guy? Trish asked. Do you think he was telling the truth that they will find us here? Mrs. Barnes said, I don't trust him, but I also don't think we should take the chance that he was lying. I agree, I said. We should pack up everything we can and get out of here. Everyone quickly gathered up their things, and a few people ran outside to load up the salt bags into the bus. Some others made sure all the food and supplies we may need were taken. As we were getting on the bus, Arvin said, If they're as smart as that man says they are, won't they just follow these tracks too and get to us? I have no idea, I said. Why don't we take the SUV down the road a bit and pull it into a driveway to make it look like we are there? Worth a try, he said. I told Arvin to pull the bus out and have it ready to go while I take the SUV down the road. Then I ran over to the SUV and drove it down the road about a quarter of a mile. I pulled up a driveway and then back down the block most of the road. For good measure, I ran up to the door and back to the vehicle a few times. Even though I was already out of breath, I ran as quickly as I could back to the bus and sat down next to Ali. That wasn't very far, Dad. Why are you breathing so loudly? She said. Hey, it is hard to run in the cold, I said, in between my rapid breaths. Arvin drove us down the road towards the fire station. We hadn't talked about whether it was a good idea to seek help from the strange man, but, like a lot of our decisions, there wasn't much of a choice. I turned around and watched out of the back of the window to see if I could see any sign of cars coming, but didn't see anything. I remained looking until we went around a curve and out of sight. Ali had pulled out a book to read from her backpack and seemed content for the time being. The rest of the bus was silent as we rode on towards the fire station. There wasn't much to see along the way. No other cars on the side of the road, and thankfully, no cars coming after us. However, we were all surprised to see the numerous cars in the parking lot of the fire station once it came into view. Arvin stopped just before the entrance of the parking lot. I thought he said he was alone, said Arvin. About half of the cars were not covered in snow, so either they arrived pretty recently, or he came out to clear them off. The asphalt was also mostly clear of snow, but I could see the piles of salt spread throughout the lot. A few of the others on the bus had walked up to the front and were discussing what we should do. The consensus was that we should check it out to see if there was anyone else there. Arvin drove past the entrance and backed in so we'd have an easy escape route. As usual, Mrs. Barnes and Trish volunteered. Jessica wanted to come in, but she still needed to rest up from her injuries. I said I would go this time, and we also had a couple new volunteers offering to go with us, Adam and Jared. We gathered the usual, guns, flashlights, walkie-talkies, and then climbed off the bus. It was warming up a bit, and the snow was melting, but it was still too cold. After we went a little ways from the loud rumbling engine of the bus, another noise stopped us. Is that a generator? Asked Adam. Sounds like it, said Mrs. Barnes. I would think the noise would attract them. With the generator and the cars, not to mention the strange older man, I was afraid we were heading into a bad situation. Maybe we should get back to the bus and find somewhere else to go, I said. Before anyone replied, we heard the sound of a garage door opening up. I turned around to see Rick walking out with a big smile on his face. Well, don't just stand there. Come in, come in. I have a lot to show you.